Get the momentum rolling. Joining us on the call, first guest of the evening, it's Rob Tebbutt. How are you, Rob?
Hello, Stephen. Good, mate. How are you?
Not too bad at all. Keeping well. We're talking a bit of fight camp earlier. Were you all over it?
I don't know, all over it. I was sitting down eating a kebab while I was watching it in my living room. So I watched the fights. Yeah, I watched the show. Obviously, wasn't there. Yeah, watched it.
What about Harper Jonas, then main event? Pretty good stuff. Undercard as well, wasn't it? I don't think it was the strongest. It'd probably be the weakest of the four overall.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Chris Billum-Smith and Nathan Fawley always going in. That was always going to be heavily weighted in Chris Billum-Smith's favour. Naturally, the bigger guy, Nathan Fawley, not long coming up from light heavyweight. I don't quite know how he made light heavyweight. I mean, he's not quite filled out into cruiserweight, but he's still like 6'4", 6'5". But I thought Chris Billum-Smith boxed very well, but he was kind of, he was a heavy favourite going in, but did the job in a couple of rounds. Anthony Fowler and Adam Harper was one-way traffic for a lot longer than I cared to have watched it. I thought it should really have been stopped after 4 rounds. I thought Fowler showed some good improvements under Shane McGuigan, but there wasn't an awful lot coming back at him. Obviously, the tests are going to come for Fowler when he's at, fighting Cheeseman, Fitzgerald rematch, or even somebody like Sam Eggington or the winner of Kieran Conway, Nav Mansouri. I thought that fight went on a bit too long. To just touch upon what we were talking about earlier about the brain scan of Adam Harper, Kieran Smith, obviously another 154-pounder, was due to fight him. And I was on a Zoom call with Kieran a couple of weeks ago, and Kieran said that, he had a brain scan come up. I'm not sure what exactly was wrong, but there was something that essentially made him withdraw from the fight and sort of mini retirement really, and then came back, and that was his first fight after 2 years. So for me, in retrospect especially, it kind of makes the corner work that little bit more difficult to understand. If you know that somebody's gone through that and been out of the ring for 2 years, then I thought he took some needless hammer for a few rounds. Hopey Price, again, relatively one-sided fight. Johnny Phillips came, had a go, tried to make it a little bit rough for him, but Hopey Price pretty much saw it out for out. I think if it was gone a couple more rounds, he might have been able to make more of a dent in Johnny Phillips. But the main event was excellent. Really, really good fight. A lot more competitive than I'd anticipated going in. I think similar to a lot of people. Was really impressed with Tasha Jonas, but I was quite disappointed with Terry Harper. I thought Terry Harper against Eva Wallstrom boxed a lot more of a smarter fight. I thought she thought about things a lot more there, whereas I feel like she got sucked into fighting Tasha Jonas's fight at times, who I thought was really, really good on the inside. I felt like Tasha Jonas landed the eye-catching shots throughout. I had it for her for a couple of rounds. Can't really argue with a 95-95, I don't think, but I felt Tasha Jonas won the fight. But it was a great fight, which not a lot of people expected going in. Obviously, Terry Harper was Canelo's favourite fighter. She's going to go in there and she's going to do this and that and what have you. But I thought Tasha Jonas boxed very well.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment of the main event. I thought Jonas did, and she dragged Harper into her type of fight. Regarding the access point of view, obviously Frank's had shows, Eddie's had shows. You obviously work for Boxing Social. What's the deal with access? What have you been told, going forward, how this is all going to plan out? Have you been given any assurances or anything?
No assurances. I think everybody is somewhat at the mercy still of the guidelines from the British Boxing Board of Control. I think they're very, very stringent. We saw early Frank Warren shows. It was like watching something from like a futuristic, it just looked completely crazy. But I think they're going to start potentially relaxing them. But we've had no assurances or kind of idea as to when or if we'll be going to Fight Camp or the BT studios. But to be honest, I mean, I understand that, if you start inviting a couple or 2 or 3 and then everybody wants to come, and that's just not possible under the guidelines. And at the end of the day, it's taken long enough for us to get boxing on as it is. And I feel like the board have had to go in very, very weighty with the health and safety restrictions. And it's just meant that, unfortunately, no place for us, which is obviously not ideal. I'm about done with Zoom interviews, I think, but it's just one of those things, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like organising a wedding, isn't it? You let one cousin come, you got to let them all.
Yeah, pretty much. And I understand that's not possible. We've gone down to fight camp on a couple of occasions to interview Eddie. Obviously, the fighters are in quarantine by then. I think Eddie has to come out of quarantine and then get a maybe another COVID test or something. I don't know how he does it, but he'll come out, do interviews, and then go back into the bubble. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, there's not really any plans for us to cover any shows at the shows anytime soon. So we're kind of just doing the best with what we can, still covering the shows and the build-up. Spent the last couple of days trying to chase up fighters for Zoom interviews, which isn't really easy because they've spent the whole week in quarantine. So they just want to just not sit behind a phone or a laptop and do an interview, which you have to respect. So it's just like anything throughout COVID. There's new obstacles and new ways that you have to try and work and try and still do your job, which is ultimately to cover the fighters and cover the shows. So
yeah, talking about Eddie and Frank, we briefly touched upon this earlier. We will discuss it later as well. Obviously, Frank sent out the email looking to get it on. We've had Billy Joe Saunders fight John Ryder on Box Nation in the past. We've had Bradley Skeet against Sam Eggington. Maybe one or two fights might slip through between the two. Are you hopeful that Eddie and Frank might get something together?
I'm hopeful that the mandated fights might come off. But outside of that, I mean, I think some of them are just wholly unrealistic, and you have to question kind of the motives behind suggesting those fights. Daniel Dubois is not going to fight Dillian White next in a million years. It's just not going to happen. It makes no sense. So that kind of, I've interviewed a few people who have kind of pointed to that as kind of a weird starting point to go off. If I can kind of picture it in my head now, Eddie and Frank meeting, if that's the first fight they want to discuss, I don't think that's got any legs whatsoever. So that's not really and that's the most high profile fight on there. Obviously, you've got Liam Williams and Demetrius Andrade. That's been ordered. Chris Jenkins, Conor Benn's been ordered. But obviously, there's the kind of the back and forth between the two camps even now after these phone calls and olive branches as such, where Conor Benn had made an offer for Chris Jenkins to box at Fight Camp a matter of weeks ago, and apparently that wasn't deemed worthy by Warren or whatever Eddie's saying about it. So again, it's like after so many months and years of this bitter rivalry, all of a sudden the next week they're going to be friends and make these fights. I don't see certainly a lot of them happening. I think the fight that does make sense, and it also has created a lot of buzz, is Boazzi versus Anthony Yarde. I think that's a brilliant fight, and I think that can be made. But I mean, Eddie's already come out and said that it's not going to happen this year. He said that to Andy from Boxing Social yesterday when they did the interview. So how quickly Frank wants to get on with things. I mean, if they can just have a conversation and it be civil, as in, let's do this again or let's discuss this fight, then that's great. That's a step in the right direction. But, I think Eddie kind of hit the nail on the head in an interview. I think he did with Umar with IFL when he said, if Frank would have just called me up and suggested these things, then it does lend itself more to thinking, okay, he really wants to get it done. And, I see what Eddie's saying with that. If you make a call or, you want to work something out, you give somebody a call, right? You don't send out a big press release. But, maybe that's just their way of doing it, the shock factor. And, Eddie's not shy of making a statement or two and doing things in public. So at the end of the day, if it leads to some fights and some cross-promotional fights, I'm all for it. But I do think it's going to be really, really difficult. That's just my honest opinion. I can't see a lot of those fights happening.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a pessimist. I don't think they'll happen either. I've seen it in boxing too many times. Unfortunately, politics gets in the way. But you never know. They might reach across to each other and make a few of them. Ben Farouki, friend of the pod, was telling me that you are the only British reporter to have covered all of Tyson Fury's comeback fights. Any decent anecdotes? How have you found it so far following Fury around the world?
I don't know. I don't know. It's difficult to kind of put your finger on it because you're in fight week and you're running around, and then before you know it, it's kind of over. And I only see Fury kind of as and when we're doing interviews, which can be 2 minutes or 15 minutes, once in the week. One story. So I went to interview him. So I interviewed him in Vegas, and he sort of messed about and was, I don't know, he just stood in front of a load of people and he was kind of being the showman and showing off sort of thing. The interview actually did really well for us. We managed to get a good title and a good thumbnail. It did really well. But he pissed about for the whole interview, really, as he does sometimes. He'd done a whole day of media, wasn't really interested in doing me, doesn't really know me, so it's fair enough. Next time we go to do an interview, so it's I think that was for the Schwartz fight, and then this was for the Wallin fight, and I'd kind of made a point in my head of thinking, right, I'm going to get something good with him, because I've never, ever got anything good with Fury until that point. I'd always either been told no or had like 1 or 2 minute interviews where he, couldn't wait to get out of there. So it's hard to pin him down. He has done, he's done 20, 30 interviews, just wants to go. So I kind of prepared and went through like, okay, I'm going to ask this. And if he kind of flat bats that, then we're going to ask that and do a little bit more interesting interviews. It was around the time where everybody was talking about Joshua and Wilder and blah, blah, blah. And he just wanted to talk about himself. So he comes over to me before we start the interview. We were at Top Rank office and he goes, "Hello there, Rob." And I went, "Oh, hello, Tyson." He goes, "Got to give you a good interview today, haven't I? Because I pissed about last time." And I went, yeah, that'd be really good, Tyson. He said, "I tell you what, my brother Shane's over there. If you let him punch you in the face, I'll give you the best interview you've ever had in your life." And I went, "Can he punch me in the stomach?" And he went, "Yep, Shane, get over here." And Shane lifted my shirt up, wound back with a big hook, and then stopped. And Fury went, "Right, you can have the interview then." And then we sat down and we did the interview, and it went well. And then it was an interview where we kind of talked about his roots and Andy Lee. And funnily enough, the Kronk gym and the time that he spent at the Kronk gym, and obviously ended up going back to those roots in his next fight after that. And then when I came over for the Fury fight, for the Wilder rematch, he remembered that kind of incident beforehand, and it was nice. And we actually had it was a 6 or 7 minute interview, but he was a lot more cordial and he was a lot more welcoming than he had been in the past, because I think he realised that I really just wanted to do the interview. So yeah, that's probably my Fury anecdote. But I mean, as far as covering him, I mean, it's probably been the best thing that I have to keep my voice down because my missus is nearby, but it's one of the best things that I've ever done in my life.
You might be getting punched in the stomach eventually tonight if you're not careful.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I can say this. I mean, my missus isn't quite as powerfully built as Shane Fury, so I'm not as worried about that. But yeah, I mean, it's been fantastic. It's went over to the Pianetta fight in Belfast, and Wilder coming over there, and him and John Fury at the weigh-in, and then before we kind of even going over on the plane to Wilder Fury 1, couldn't really quite believe it was happening. We'd seen him look so mediocre in his 2 comeback fights, and he was going over lamb to the slaughter in some people's eyes against Deontay Wilder, and it was, you had Eddie every interview going, I still don't think it's going to happen, until the first bell goes, and then that kind of breeds that around, and then obviously the fight itself was incredible. We kind of waited for the rematch. He shocked everyone with the ESPN deal, and yeah, it's been a pretty crazy time covering him, and I think it's probably one of the best things I've ever done.
Yeah, just to close out on Fury, it's interesting because obviously I'm based in Belfast, and we got him for a period when he was with Mick Hennessy, the Channel 5 fights. He fought Nikolai Firth, Kevin Johnson, which was one of the worst fights I was ever at. Martin Rogan. And he hasn't changed. Yeah, well, that's the thing. It was different then because he wasn't obviously the big star that he is now, and he hadn't got the higher profile. So you had more access to him, and you got more interviews and longer interviews. But he hasn't changed personality-wise that I can see. He was still the same back then. I mean, he used to come off with some of the most ridiculous things you've ever heard, but it was a good laugh back in Belfast then as well. And obviously he's gone on to achieve what he has, but it doesn't sound like he's changed too much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an extensive, long relationship with Fury, and so I can't comment on what I found him like back then. But I mean, he has a kind of weird ability, not a weird ability, I mean, it's just the ability to command the room sort of thing. He's very, very engaging, very charismatic, and he is kind of an everyday man. I mean, whether or not you believe some of the things he says, I mean, he is ever the showman, and dousing his hands in gasoline and having 7 wanks a day, and some of that stuff's not the most creative, genius things that he's ever said, but there are times where it's usually, to be fair, when the written guys who are the real journalists and actually very good at their job, when they're interviewing him and I get to kind of eavesdrop on the round table, that's always really good because he does open up to them, and he is a really, really fascinating character, Fury. It's just, I think probably a little part of me is a little bit not gutted, but I wish I did know him from a longer period of time ago as opposed to probably the last 3-ish years. So yeah, I can imagine what he was like, but he's still seemingly a humble guy.
Just final one for you, Rob, before we let you go. We're big history buffs over here as well. You like a bit of James Toney. What's your favourite James Toney moment, performance, fight, etc.?
Oh, favourite moment is probably difficult. That's difficult.
Girov was a great fight, wasn't he? The
Yeah, the
Girov one.
Giro fight's a great fight. I'm tempted to go with that as well because I once spoke to Freddie Roach about it in LA for Wilder 3-1 actually, and we were talking about kind of the infamous commentary where he's talking about, and he just go out there and put this guy on his ass like this round. Obviously, he goes out there and he puts him on his ass. 15 seconds to go. Manny Steward's going crazy. The Iran Barkley fight is just a wonderful performance. Second fight of the way, some questions about going in against a big guy in Iran Barkley. Iran Barkley, like a heavyweight, boiled himself down to those middleweight, super middleweight, dangerous guy, and Tony just stood in the pocket and beat the shit out of him. That was an awesome performance. But I think my favourite Tony fight / moment, Mike McCallum won the first Mike McCallum fight, which was the draw. Was I always say to people, like, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against Gatti Ward's, Barrera Morales, these toe-to-toe action fights, but you get a fight like that where it's skill and countering the counter, and McCallum's probably slightly on the way down, wasn't quite at his best at 160, and Tony's slightly on the way up, still not quite the finished article, and they kind of met in the middle. And I spoke to McCallum about that randomly in Vegas, and he was saying that each fight that he fought against James Toney, he could tell that he was improving as a fighter and taking little bits from each fight. And yeah, I think probably that. I actually said to Mike McCallum, I said, James Toney was a great fighter. And he said, James Toney was a bad boy. And then he'd give me a little dig in the ribs. And he said, I was a bad boy too. And I said, okay. Yeah, I know, Mike, don't hurt me. But yeah, so I'd probably say that, the first McCallum fight.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to take a dig in the ribs from Mike McCallum. Heavyweight as well, Tony went up there, fought Evander Holyfield. Obviously, there's question marks about his heavyweight reign because of the PEDs, John Ruiz fight and all that. But the way he dissected Holyfield, it was a masterclass, really.
Yeah, fantastic fight. And, everyone always looks back at kind of the gif of him sticking the tongue out and stuff. And everyone always points to the fact that Holyfield was still past his best. But it's still fucking Evander Holyfield. Like, James Toney started his career as a middleweight. So, I mean, like the Samuel Peter fights as well, like standing there and trading with like a 260-pound Sam Peter is like, considering you started your career as a middleweight, it's just incredible. And yeah, James Toney, don't get me wrong, as a heavyweight, would he, would I pick him against the modern era of heavyweights, the giants? And probably not, no. But that's kind of the thing with him and Roy. Like, Roy went up and obviously did his thing against John Ruiz, but James Toney stood in there and traded with these big guys, catching counter. And, I think he's a wonderful example of an aggressive defensive fighter, which I think people, certainly modern day, will look at a defensive fighter as simply somebody who moves around the ring, uses a lot of lateral movement, whereas the kind of art of infighting, your James Toney, Roberto Duran, etc., Pernell Whitaker, another person who would make people miss in the pocket and come back with his own counters. I think that's probably becoming not a forgotten art, but people don't necessarily associate that with good defensive boxing. So yeah, that's my James Toney take.
Yes, we'll have a bit of James Toney here. Thanks for joining us, Rob. I appreciate it. Come back again.
Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.
All the best now. Cheers.
Cheers.